This is our weekly Commissioners Finance meeting. Today is May 10th, 2023, appointed hour 1:30 p.m. is arrived. So we'll get started. Call the meeting to order and begin with any opportunity for public comment. Okay, along we have minutes in hand of our meeting of April 26th this year. Require action.
Move to approve minutes of April 26th.
A second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. If no further questions, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, we've got a number of topics today. We'll get started on the first one is our quarterly update from Cumberland County Housing and Redevelopment Authority. We have Mary Kuna, Director, with us today to walk us through.
Thank you. So, all right. So, is it working? I mean, good. There we go. Oh. Okay, work for you? There we go. All right, we're moving. All right, so we have actually been quite busy since last time we spoke with everyone. I just wanted to give some statistics because I think people, Cumberland County is the fastest growing county in the state. We've heard that for many years and we know that. And that is part of the housing conundrum here in the county. And essentially for my agency, one thing to really note there is the household incomes. So Cumberland County is quite an affluent county, in fact. And another piece of the puzzle is when you look at the total number of households and the division of renters versus owner occupied, we have quite a significant number of homeowners in Cumberland County. So it does prove a bit challenging. It also answers the question with the emergency rental assistance program and some others, why we had to reevaluate some of those fundings and find different ways to utilize them, because again, we are mostly a homeowner county. What I think people don't know, and this is going to change probably in the next month, but these are what qualifies a family for a number of assistance programs. So when you think about public housing, you're looking at generally that 30%. 50% is what we try to target with the Section 8, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and 80% is basically, it qualifies you for all of those. We just have certain metrics to meet. But again, you can qualify for a number of our programs, owner-occupied rehab, and essentially the first-time homebuyer program, if you fall into that bracket. And you think of a family of one making $52,000, that's a recent graduate, you know, who's looking to start their career. So it is not what a lot of people seem to perceive. Again, that's just who we are. It's not the same over here. So what we are seeing, our waiting list for the voucher program has grown significantly since the pandemic. So we are up to about 2,700 households. And between Cumberland and Perry counties, there are a little over 1,300 vouchers available. So that is what HUD provides. That's the limit. And right now we're actually about 1,200 of those plus are leased up. So we're still out there engaging with landlords. Coordinated entry by name list. So this is the number of households in the county that are essentially homeless. That number is a little bit higher than what I'm sharing here today. We receive enough funding to put 82 individuals who are chronically homeless or need rapid rehousing into housing, but that's about the amount we can handle with our funding. So when you look at that number, there's a big disconnect. Public housing, we have a waiting list of over 1,300 households. We only have 208 units. Again, that target is aiming for individuals who are at that 30% or below. Community development funding, our requests far exceed what we actually receive from HUD. And we're having trouble with the availability of contractors, but I think that's just nationwide and anybody can tell you they're having the same problem. Home ownership, our issue is supply and demand. There is not enough supply to meet the demands. We're seeing homes that are in disrepair, so we're trying to remedy that. And in addition, there's just overall rising costs of everything. So really, that's what we're seeing. The question is, what are we doing about it? So I am a doer. And My staff know that. So they bought into it, and so we are doing a lot. We are doing a heavy amount of landlord engagement. So we're doing landlord incentives, we're having happy hours, you name it, we're gonna do it. So right now, we've actually gotten 27 new landlords to participate in the voucher program. So those are individuals who have never accepted vouchers and have decided that it's a great opportunity for them to accept our funding, accept our tenants. So that's been a really wonderful investment in our time and efforts. So there are currently 4 affordable housing developments in the county that are being developed. So you're going to see 2 of those on the West Shore. There's 2 going out in the Shippensburg area, and there's a few looking around Carlisle. So there is that constant churn happening, but developing something does take a few years. So it's not here it is. And then we also offer now a small landlord revolving loan fund, which is getting some interest. I think as rates are rising, landlords are starting to really look at that. Tenant engagement. So part of this, yes, we want landlords, but also it is our responsibility to make sure they are receiving good tenants. So whenever you receive a voucher, you have to take a certification class. That was usually done in-house. It's a video, staff talk to them. It's just your responsibilities as a voucher holder. With the pandemic, we had to move that entirely online. Now, the staff want to bring it back in-house, so it will be in our office. They'll watch the video, they can ask some questions, but we're also going to use it as a time to push the family self-sufficiency program. The idea there is, for some individuals, this is permanent assistance. For others, this is a step. So we would really like to start pushing more individuals to understand what the family self-sufficiency program is. We put money in an escrow account for you so that when you are ready to take the next step, you are ready to go off the program. If you were garnering enough income, then it's a worthwhile cause to have that backup. So we are really pushing that. We are looking at 2 satellite locations, just office space, but we will be out in Shippensburg and out in New Cumberland just to have a presence. So if you need to drop off documents, talk to somebody, we'll be there at least 1 day a week to make sure that there's accessibility to our staff. And then in addition to that, the voucher expansion, yes, we're limited with vouchers. However, credit to my Housing Choice Voucher Director, Becky Shull. She and her staff do an amazing job, and it was noticed by the Lebanon VA. So what they did, there's a specific type of voucher for veterans, and we accepted a few of those to try out to see if we could handle them. We did phenomenal. Basically, the VA refers an individual to us, and they get one of these VASH vouchers. In fact, it's been so successful, they're giving us more. So now we're receiving another 10 vouchers. The change is that there is a different level for a veteran. Essentially, those vouchers do take into account that you may have certain things in your past that would normally limit you on a regular voucher program, but they do take into account that a veteran has a different level of need. We also are working on, and I think we've already implemented, what's Tom's Court. So what would generally happen, I know the county's been really pushing the court system with Tom's Court and allowing individuals to expunge their record if they go through a process. So generally what's been happening is if you have a certain criminal history, you will automatically be denied a voucher. You'll have to go through an appeal. What we're doing is allowing essentially individuals who are in Tom's Court to have their appeal heard and their voucher put on hold. So what it means is they don't lose their place in the waiting list while they go through the process. We do want to see some that they've accomplished and completed it, but we will hold their place. So they won't lose out and go to the back of the list. We'll make sure that they stay on it.
So in terms of these vouchers, aside from these specialty ones that you've outlined, so how is that number, the general number, set?
That's set by HUD. And I think they look at population and poverty rates, right? They set that and then they can up and decrease it.
So it could be a uniform standard, us versus other counties.
Yes, except for some of the more competitive, the VASH vouchers and some other ones that we can go and apply for. We haven't looked at any of those recently. There's some nuanced ones because we're having enough trouble trying to find to take ours. But we do have a foster one, which the county participates in. So we refer foster individuals coming out of foster care, can receive one to get on their feet.
Especially.
Yeah, so those are above and beyond what we get.
So is there ability to be on a waiting list in multiple counties?
Yes, so you can be on multiple waiting lists. Cumberland, we specifically do give a preference so they can move up if they have to live in the county or work in the county for a number of months. So we do give a preference, but we do have a lot that apply from Dauphin, from other states even. So they can apply, but the preference moves anybody who's here up. And then what are we doing about the coordinated entry list? So we're streamlining grant administration. The idea with HUD is that if you essentially spend all your money, they'll give you more. So what we're trying to do is spend all the money, give us more, spend all the money, give us more. Part of that is just taking the programs and consolidating them. We're going to be working on additional applications for more funding to come into the county. And then I'm looking at hiring a housing programs director. So that would ideally be able to put all these programs together and focus a little bit more. We're doing a closer relationship with Section 8, Housing Choice Voucher. If you are coming out of rapid rehousing, we should set you up to already be able to get a voucher and move along. The whole goal here is a pipeline. And that's establishing some goals for these programs. We really do want to establish a pipeline. We can't require people to do anything, but we can work closely with them and get them ready to be successful on the voucher program. And public housing, we actually launched our first event, which was on May 6th. The idea was to have a community event and encourage people to say thank you to the community, but also to get individuals to show up in person. We had tablets and everybody could sit there with a voucher rep and do the online application right there, get all your documents scanned in right there. So we thought we would probably not see a big turnout for the housing piece, but we had all kinds of vendors and crafts, and it was a really nice event, and we gave away free hot dogs and hamburgers. But we ended up with, I believe, 35 individuals showed up with all their documents in hand, ready to go, ready to sit out there with staff. It was very successful. And again, the idea is to try and we're pushing that waiting list down to basically say, if you're not interested and they've moved on, then we can get to the people who are really in need. So we're doing a big push, and our family self-sufficiency program at public housing has an individual who is now really working with some community partners, because again, the goal is it's a pipeline. And I have a typo here, but community development funding. So what we're doing about this, we're doing a spending push. That's the idea. Push the money out, push it out. And we've been doing a lot of outreach with various applicants. So I'll give credit to the community development staff there. We've had more applicants than usual, actually, for the CDBG program. Home is out there. I think we've had 6 interested. We're also doing a lot of contractor outreach. I have a staff member who goes around to any home show and hands out as many cards and pencils as she can. So we're trying to make it less scary to work with the government. Contractors, particularly for owner-occupied rehab and other programs, these are 2-man shops. So working with us is a bit intimidating. We're trying to make that as streamlined as possible. We really are. And so having somebody who's dedicated to working with them, walking them through, she's gone on site. Her name's Megan Kelly. She's wonderful. She's gone on site. She'll sit with them, walk them through how you do the paperwork. If our goal is not to penalize you if you've done it wrong, let's talk to you about how you've done it and how you can do it right. Home ownership, what are we doing about that? Well, we're doing an event that may have gotten bigger than expected on the 24th. It's a lender and realtor outreach. So we are actually going over to the Greater Harrisburg Association of Realtors offices, and we'll give everybody breakfast and talk about our programs. We found that most lenders and most realtors don't actually know about owner-occupied rehab, first-time home buyer, the demolition fund. And that is exactly what we're trying to do. Know about it, refer, and we do housing counseling. So if you have somebody who's a first-time home buyer and they're not ready to work with you as a realtor, instead of saying, hey, you're not ready, send them over. We have all of these resources. Let's use them as a county. Whole homes program. This was just launched by the state, and the county allowed the redevelopment authority to be the applicant for this program. This is an expansion of the owner occupied rehab program, the landlord revolving loan program, and we are also using it to do a stipend for trainees, so contractor trainees. The goal is, if we get so many people applying to have their homes rehabbed, we're going to need contractors. And so we're going to incentivize contractors. So if you participate and you also have a trainee, we'll provide a stipend for that trainee. It is a bit complicated. The state sort of launched the guidelines and didn't have a lot of time to do it. They are hoping to make it permanent. And they did hear a lot of the authorities and counties consternation with the guidelines. So they are working through maybe next year having a little bit more simplified program, allowing us a little bit more autonomy to do what we need. Only 3 counties, I believe, in the state did not accept the money. So 3 of them felt they couldn't handle it, but everyone else did. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board has expanded programs. Essentially, I told the staff, look and see what's working, what isn't. Well, costs go up. And a lot of times we keep our standards the same, which is not feasible. So what we've done is we've raised the emergency rehab piece of the puzzle. We're going to have another board meeting to talk about raising that first-time home buyer, some of those caps, because costs have gone up. We need to respond to that. And then we're also going to be launching this summer an employer-assisted housing piece. We're calling it mortgage match just because it sounds fun. But my thought process is, a lot of times employers have made the comments that, you know, they want to see more housing, but then how are you investing? So this idea is, we already have a first-time home buyer program. We already do the down payment closing assistance. What if you refer an employee and are willing to match us? Dollar for dollar, 50 cents on the dollar, but you help your employee out. They're already required to be in that house for 5 years because it is a forgivable loan. So maybe they could the employer work with us and say, hey, we'll help match it. Employers invest in their employees' education. Why not invest in their housing? So we're going to attempt this. It's not a foreign concept, but it's just getting the right employers who are interested in doing that. So it's being fleshed out.
Are they required to maintain their employment?
That would be on their employer, but their employer could, you know, when you pay for an employee's college education or anything like that, you can have them sign an agreement. So if we're already holding them for 5 years, maybe an employer would want to say, hey, if I'm helping you buy a house, 5 years. But yeah, so I thought it would be an interesting way to do a public-private.
Before you move on to that, because one of the things you mentioned about property rehab, I know I've asked this question before, not of you, and I'm not sure I ever got an answer, but I may have.
Okay.
And that is, one of the things that was conveyed to me multiple times in past years is that we've got folks who are, I'm not amateur, but they're not professional builders, they are skilled builders, and they're rehabbing homes, which obviously addresses some of this, especially the first-time buyers. And as was described to me one time, you know, the contractor's driving out the driveway and the county assessor is driving in the driveway now.
Okay.
Is there anything that we can do at our level, Stacy? Maybe that's a question for you, in terms of a period of abatement or something on when that's done? I mean, under normal circumstances, it would take a while for assessment office to catch up with that anyhow, but that's not always the case. So I don't know if there's something we can do on that on our end.
Oh, you mean for like a first-time buyer?
Somebody who's just rehabbing dilapidated property. So it goes to the blight question. I raised this blight, and then they're immediately sought with a higher assessment, which of course gets passed on in rents.
Sure. So there were two things happening. So there is a law that was passed, or an act that was passed, that will give you the ability to do a tax abatement for blighted areas. And the state requires just 2 years. But there is that act, and the county could basically respond. And I can draft you what that looks like. You get 3 options. One is for people who you could do blatant abatement across the board for people who need a certain income. You can do one for blighted properties, or you could do one for affordable housing developments.
So it is targetable.
Yes,
If
it's
somebody's-
very targetable.
Okay.
And then there's another one that may be in play. I talked to one of our state reps about the first-time home buyer, and he said, do you think it would be worth seeing if there's a way to do an abatement for them for statewide? And I thought, well, yeah, nothing hurts really. So what I'll do is I'll write that up, and so that way you can see sort of it's almost 3 buckets to choose from. And I'll send that over. Yeah,
Thank you.
not a problem.
Yeah, and I would think that probably Kirkstone or Kathy Waters, I think would be great. Mary, I can share that with them and then outreach, because in terms of, you know, when the building permit is then processed and the internal work process of the assessor then heading out because that building permit has, you know, been finalized, I think that, you know, they would have a lot of really great insight for the board to consider as well.
No, that'd be great. So as I mentioned, what are the results? Essentially, we've had 27 new landlords participate. We went from 12 first-time home buyers in our January class to now there's over 25 plus on our waiting list who want to be in May's class. We're thinking about adding another class actually. And we've had now 23 people. We started a waiting list for the Whole Homes program because it has gotten so much press. So we have 23 households on that right now, and that's just going to continue to climb. But we wanted to start getting a list together as they have interest, get them pre-qualified essentially. We've spent down all of our COC and ESG. This is almost related monies within the required time frame. So we were behind, now we're caught up and we're moving along. We're seeing increased voucher participation each month. We would do polls of 50 to 70 and your response rate, maybe less than 10%. Now we're seeing it go up to at least 30% plus. And we also have been pushing our street view program. This is what does facades. Building owners, we've lightened that one and made it just please apply. We have 6 in progress and more forthcoming. I think the downtowns, a lot of them have coordinators. We've done a bang up job talking to those coordinators and they are pushing this out. So we also have 10 emergency repairs that were completed for homeowners, which emergency repairs, we use the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to do those. It moves them along quicker instead of other.
Don't some of the municipalities have their own facade improvement programs as well?
I think if you do, we're trying to have them couple it. So, because theirs are small, there might be
Right,
$1,000 or so, but we want them to be able to couple with us and we're
Okay,
talking.
so there's
through that.
chances there would be additional money.
Right.
That way.
Right, and we're reevaluating, do we have to raise it? The cap hasn't been raised in years, so maybe it's something to look at. So basically, this is where we stand with all the programs we manage for housing. We'll get into those. That's everything we manage for community development. I will say for the blighted property piece, we have had really stellar compliance. And what I mean by that is, for me, eminent domain and conservatorship are the last resorts. The government coming in is a last resort. If we can push you to voluntarily comply, that is the goal. And so we've had great success. A property in Lower Mifflin has taken care of itself. There's been a number of Silver Spring, we'll sing our praises all day, but they've had compliance, which sometimes is selling it if you can't take care of it. So it is some of that natural transition. East Pennsboro, a number of those property owners have actually gotten in touch with the borough in the township. So that's the idea. The goal is not to really have to go all out and take something. It is please, comply. So these are all of the things that we have and we're working on in tools and our partners. And so I guess the best way I could say why we do it, or at least why I do it, bless these people here. So we have a number of residents, we have a number of community partners, and I have a huge staff and they're very invested in all of this. So it is not without appreciation for these people. Believe me, they keep it going every day. So and try to keep me safe. So that is where we are at, and I would be happy to share anything else, but feel free to request as you need information.
The one question, and
Sure.
I'll try to keep it short. I know
No, you're fine.
But you mentioned about, especially at the beginning, about the percentage of home ownership versus rental.
Mhm.
And this area has traditionally always been very oriented toward buy a home as soon as you can and all that. So, and as your term was, we are, but who we are is changing as well. And there was a study released just this week, I can't remember who did it. It was talking about, I guess they refer to them as Gen Z, Generation Z. And they have increasingly by choice decided that they do not want the burden of home ownership. They'd rather put the dollars in a different way. We're among a lot of industrialized countries, we have much higher home ownership. Sometimes it's by necessity, sometimes not. So are we seeing a fundamental shift there, and are we monitoring that to know if that's the next thing, the next big wave?
Yeah, that's actually a good question for particularly the developers. But what we are going to do this year in our new, so we have to do essentially a plan. So we hire a consultant who comes in and does a 5-year plan and an assessment for us. Well, the idea is, and I've been talking to, I'm going to send it to Kirk and to Janet to take a look at when we get the RFP together. But the idea is with that plan, because we have to have it, our consolidated plan, we have to fund it using CDBG. Why not add in a component where they have to update the housing information data each year? So this way we have something new to work with, because our 5-year plan was done right before the pandemic and that sent it for a loop. But we see it's a variety of housing. Population we serve tend to start off renting. So even if, let's say, Gen Z goes to renting at some of the bigger developments and they create more multifamily, it will open up some of those doors for our renters to get into some of those units that they vacate. So I think there's good potential either way, but we'll make sure that annually we have that updated. So that way we can get a better picture. Yeah, no problem. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks,
Mary, I have
Mary.
a question.
Yeah,
So
sure.
the 20 landlords, where are they located? The majority of them?
They're actually from the county. So there's a lot that we got from the West Shore. Carlisle has a number of landlords who already work with us, but we did find a lot on the West Shore. And we're doing an event with the Shippensburg Chamber out in Shippensburg, because we don't get a lot of participation out in Shippensburg. It's a university town. The housing is renters tend to be students out there. So our hope is that if we can work with some landlords out in the more rural side of the county, they may have properties that will be willing to accept a voucher as well. But a lot of them have actually been on the West Shore.
But that is a very relevant question because of the need for rehab in a lot of the older mature communities. So anything we can do to help push that along, I mean, those communities are where a lot of new homeowners are seeking to buy resettled peoples.
Your staff have been amazing. I mean, from the marketing piece, your staff have been great. And then even dealing with Kirk and being able to go to he does those quarterly municipal meetings. And so being able to do those updates, part of the rehab piece has been being able to meet with the codes enforcement officers and say, if you're going to go out and cite, here's a pamphlet to immediately give them for owner occupied rehab. We have the money, we have the program. So it's been a very comprehensive view of it. And I will say your staff have been great. Your department's been willing to help us push things out. And that's been wonderful. But yes, every time the county ever has an event, we're happy to come and push it. But keeping the municipalities in the loop has been part of the piece here, and trying to get them to refer the blighted properties and hand out those. We did get a win in Shippensburg with owner occupied rehab. They were happy that they went out and cited somebody and were able to give them, and we came in and helped a few days later. So it's just getting them to know that the county is a partner.
And since you mentioned municipalities, so we are also educating them on what the fair housing requirements are, because that was an issue in the past.
Yeah, that's what I'm planning on doing. I have a staff member that I think I'm going to get fully certified in fair housing and go out and do some trainings. There's a nonprofit we can bring in to do some of that work, but yeah, educating them is, but you run into some of them are short staffed. So trying to get their time has been really challenging. So what we're kind of hitting it from both worlds at the moment. Yep. No, thank you.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Mary.
Thank you.
Okay, very good, very good. Okay, that moves us on to our second discussion item, which no surprise to us is the issue of mental health funding. And Dana's here, Dana's here, playing back. I guess, so.
Yep, and I have tons of backup.
Okay. great. Feel free.
So at a previous meeting, Commissioner Fashi asked me to come up with some costs related to the impacts of the cuts to the other human service department. So at the previous Human Service Steering Committee meeting, all the human service directors and myself, we met, talked about different options. And they went back and they did a lot of due diligence in determining what they feel the impacts are, and they provided the estimates to me. And I did the prison cost based on information that was on a previous meeting on what they determined the cost would be. So what we are estimating as a conservative cost to the other departments is about $3.15 million. And of that, that includes juvenile probation, children and youth, drug and alcohol, and the prison. And when we gave the direction, we said, what is a conservative estimate so that we weren't overestimating? And these are the only departments we included. There are several departments that we didn't include, and that's aging and community services, the 911 center, the court system, the public defender, the district attorney. And we did not include the increase to MH regarding the mental health and voluntary petitions. Okay, so there's also other impacts in our community that are also important and not included in this estimate. And if we cut the medical health services, it will place additional pressures on funding emergency situations. And that'll have impacts on the demands on law enforcement, potentially increased crime, increased homelessness, increased calls to crisis. And there could be additional emergency room overflows. And what happens when the emergency room overflows, they can't take people in. Other services are also impacted. And then in addition, it will increase the mental health and voluntary positions that they have to do, which will also increase their costs. So I'm keeping this short and sweet. And if you have specific questions on how we came up with the cost, human service directors are here to help out. And I'm not sure if Travis is online or not.
I have a question, the page here with the 3.1 million.
Yes.
Are these numbers that will occur, assuming the current 2.5 million mental health gap isn't filled, or will occur regardless?
This is an estimate of what will occur if those cuts happen.
You said this is a conservative estimate,
It is a conservative estimate.
so tell me about going conservative on this. Tell me what that means. Because I can think that you took a normal estimate and cut it by 90%, but how about if you, please tell me what that means.
Well, I'll let Nikki kind of give an estimate of how we came up with the numbers in her office.
I'll start with just the main one that we worked with. Annie gave us an estimate of the services from the cast, elementary student assistance, the very
Okay.
specific cases that really are deflected from my system to her system, which is where they should be. So she gave us that number. We kind of went back and forth between us, and what I did was I figured that 60% is where we landed, that if she had nobody to answer the phone to the school or any of that, about 60% of those kids would end up with at least a phone call to us, which would initiate a referral and meet a body and begin our process. So that was our first number that we came up with, so 60%. And then we looked at all of last year and just did how many calls came in, how many closed at intake, what was that percentage? How many got passed or on to in-home, what was that percentage? How many ended up in placement? So we took from the last year, and whatever those percentages were, then we took the 60% and worked it through that way. So, and I do think they were very conservative numbers. Our largest impact, Lisa can talk a little bit about the cost, but our biggest impact would be the staff, I think was the majority of our numbers.
So we anticipated needing 2 more possible intake workers to handle all the initial calls and do the assessments. And then after that, the percentage that went to in-home, that would increase their caseloads, which all our caseworkers are already at their capacity of their caseloads. So we would need another in-home worker to be able to handle 16 new cases, and then also a placement worker potentially to handle three more children in placement.
If I'm remembering correctly from our 3 town hall meetings, the cast program is something that if this $2.5 million does not appear, will be cut. That'll be it. We won't have it anymore.
We're almost gonna be forced to either look at residential program just because of the size of the amount of money we spend in residential services for adults, or student assistance, because we spend over $1 million there, and we spend millions of dollars in residential services for adults with serious mental illness. Those are 2 high cost centers that we spend a lot of money in, and crisis intervention. Well, obviously, we can't cut crisis, so yeah, this is complex.
It is. It's complex.
Her programs are a large diversion of ours. You know what I mean? We have crossover cases and families, but that's because they reach a higher level. Annie's staff and the school basic, and they make referrals for kids who need clothing and food, and all those would absolutely then end up with us to have to match them up, work with them, and all of that. So it's that intake area would be a huge impact to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd like to hear the same conversation. Andy, can you talk about
Sure.
your conservative estimate, please?
So again, for us, it's prevention, because a lot of these youth are in preventative care before they would make it to juvenile probation. But one of the things that we do at intake is we assess through our trauma screen, and we also do the mazing, which triggers significant mental health events. 20% of the youth that we get coming in our front door are at a critical level. And that's not even like a warning level. Critical means they're at a point where their mental health is having an impact on them that we need to refer them either out for mental health treatment, or we're having conversations with families to say, we think you need to look into this because you're at a point where not only is your child getting arrested, but there's other warning signs that we're worried about, suicidal ideation, all kinds of different things. So what I did was, I figured I believe it was 1,800 cases is what was given to us as the number for the year. Well, 20% of those cases, I figured that puts us, I forget what the number was exactly, but it was 300, 400 kids. That a number of those have already reached us because obviously that program's been in place. So I think a fair assessment is another 20%, because I know that 40% of the kids not only are at a critical level, but are also scoring at a level that's a level of concern. So I felt like a fair assessment is an additional 20% of those kids would make it to our front door that aren't there because of the preventative services that are taking place. And some of those families have probably been intervened or interacted with prior to making it to being arrested. When I look at that number, I think it put me around 72 kids. So an additional 72 referrals to our department would certainly require an additional probation officer, intake officer to complete intakes, as well as an additional supervision officer to provide supervision in the community, as well as some of the other programs we utilize, but at least at the minimum, 2 additional staff members. What I also do with that number is I know that 5% of my youth go to placement. So if I take 5% of those 72, I put me an additional 5 to 7 youth that potentially will go to out-of-home care. I assessed what my average out-of-home cost is for all my out-of-home programs, averaged a length of stay, and came up with a cost based on an additional 7 kids or whatever the number was, to come up with what that cost would be. And then I also know that a percentage of our youth go into in-home programming, which is community-based services, still in the community, but receives community-based services. I know what those percentages are, averaged out the average cost of that, and then figured out what that number was of that 15 or 20 or 30% of those kids that go into in-home programs, came up with that value, and then pretty much just totaled to what the cost is. So I think that's a fair, and again, it's a prevention game because you don't know exactly. But I think it's fair to say that if youth aren't intervened with in a preventative state early on, they're eventually going to get worse and eventually come through our doors. So I think it's fair to say we would definitely see an influx of it, at minimum, probably 72 to 100 youth. So.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. Jack?
Talk you through our logic process. We have a long history of collaborating with mental health on student assistance programming in particular. And one of the areas that I focused on was of the 1,800 students that received services, how many received mental health assessments? And the figures that I was aware of are almost 900 receive a mental health assessment. If those assessments were not available, almost certainly some of those would then, the schools would be looking to our system to do an assessment. There is already an overlap between mental health and drug and alcohol. But if students are unable to access mental health services, the likelihood of them using alcohol or other drugs to self-medicate is going to increase. So I estimated that, again, a conservative estimate, that there would be a 20% increase in or that 20% of those students would be referred by schools for a drug and alcohol assessment. That would be an additional 170 students. We could accommodate some of that with our existing staff, but we would certainly have to add another staff member. So we included the cost of another staff member, salary and benefits, as being about $69,000. We also provide a lot of adolescent treatment services. And a majority of those treatment services are actually provided on site in the schools through school-based treatment. We project that there would also be an increase in demand for those services based on the additional assessments. And so the estimate there was that there would be about a 25% increase in school-based treatment services. That would increase it from 219,000 to 274,000 for an additional cost of 55,000. We also looked at the supportive residential services that mental health provides to adults. And if those services are not available, I think it's easy to predict that there will be some decompensation, and there again would be folks ending up in a lot of different systems, but some of them would turn to alcohol or drugs as one way of coping if they lose their housing support. We can't pay for mental health treatment, but we already pay for co-occurring treatment. About half of the residential treatment services that we currently pay for are with facilities that are licensed both as drug and alcohol facilities and adult mental health facilities. So we think there would be a 25% increase in those services, and that would amount to another $55,000. So in a nutshell, that's how we came up with
Jack, one question on that, and I have to ask this because the proposal was put on the table before the commissioners by one of our state representatives, and that is, of the programming that you described, is there a prospect for some portion of that to be offset with the opioid recovery money?
I think, yes, some portion. If you recall, the opioid settlement money says that all of the funding must be used for some form of opioid mitigation. So, for example, if an adult has a co-occurring mental health disorder and not just a drug and alcohol disorder, but an opioid use disorder, then settlement funds could be used for that individual. So you need to kind of parcel it up by diagnosis.
Are we in a position to make any kind of even a rough estimate on what type of offset that might provide to us, even just based on past history?
We probably have to do some ciphering, as they say.
Yeah,
Several hillbillies. We'd have to.
that's a good term. I feel like we're going to end up having to do at least some of that ciphering. So don't be surprised if you get the call. But thank you.
So Jack, but if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, if there is a co-occurring disorder, then the opioid trust money could be used for a person's mental health treatment.
If the drug of choice is an opioid.
Is an opioid. Is it accurate for me to say that we can't just take opioid trust money and deliver it to mental health? And go, here you go, we're gonna fill it in. We're gonna fill in with opioid trust money, the $2.5 million deficit in mental health.
That's accurate. It's,
Okay.
it's baked into the multi-state national settlement. It's also baked into the court order set up Pennsylvania's trust fund that distributes the money to the counties. So,
Well, I'm very interested in knowing what that number could potentially be for co-occurring disorders. I'm suspicious, I suspect that it will not cover much of the $2.5 million deficit, but I see Annie shaking her head and I would really like to hear what Annie has to say.
I'm just thinking, county mental health services, last year, we served about 1,400 people. And I can go back through, I don't know that I can drill down into specific diagnoses, especially around the co-occurring piece of this. I don't know if we can even maybe look at our health choices data and sort of extrapolate based on the percentage of people who have a co-occurring opioid use disorder and a mental health disorder who receive treatment. Maybe, but that would be an extrapolation. Because our data system isn't that sophisticated, but I suspect our health choices data system might be.
the other thing I want to point out is that these projected increase in costs, a couple caveats. One is that while these would be additional costs, unlike children and youth and JPO, we're not a mandated service. We get cap funding. And so whether or not we would have the money to actually provide these costs is unknown. It would depend on our budget allocations in a given year, and we probably would end up having to look to the opioid settlement money. But the other part of that is that it's not going to replace the absence of the mental health services. There would still be a crying need in our schools for having teen line staff or county mental health elementary CAS staff available to assist.
What's really tragic about all this is, I mean, listening to our existing staff, just yesterday I spoke with teen line staff. And the term that they keep using is drowning. We're drowning. We have so many referrals, we're drowning. So if we make cuts, and that's the piece that we, in conservative estimates, we were using what's been provided so far. And yet they're already feeling like they're overwhelmed with the amount of work.
So Dana, I'm gonna ask you this question. When I see what you've presented, I come to a conclusion, a possible conclusion that says that on your conservative estimate of the cost just to the county to not fill the $2.5 million deficit, it sounds like it's more expensive to not fill it.
So when we estimated the cost, we disregarded funding source. So this is the
Okay.
cost that will be additional to the state, the federal, and county. We're estimating, it's very hard to extrapolate what funding source we would be using, whether it's 100% money, 20% money.
So we already have our, I mean, if you cut this year, starting, fiscal
Mhm.
year, so it would most likely put us in overmatch. We already have our tentative. So when we talked about the positions, you're used to us presenting 80-20.
Yeah.
We don't have them in the complement. So our estimate would most likely put us in overmatch, which would then go to the general fund until, we're made whole at the end of the fiscal year or until our budget is built up to sustain it.
But because of the degree of moving parts in any given year, you're saying the 3,147 is not necessarily the county. That's not the cost of the county.
It is the cost of the cuts.
Cost of
It's the
cuts.
potential cuts. It is a combination of state, federal, county.
Okay,
Well, and it would be state pass through. So it would have some federal dollars in it.
okay.
And in the short run, it would be a substantial amount of cuts, but we didn't go to year 2. So we didn't start estimating the exasperation that would happen. And that's why this is concern, another
The
reason.
mix
it's
could all
concern.
change in year over year, so.
Correct.
A lot of places, as I say, a lot of moving parts there. So. Okay.
But what I'm concerned about, Dana, is that we're sitting in this situation where we know that we are looking at a $2.5 million budget deficit. And if it's not filled one way or another, it's going to cost more
Correct.
than
And
not filling it.
it may cost the state more than not filling it, just in a different pocket.
Right. Right. Right.
I guess that was the question I was asking. These costs are borne by many different players.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And in the short run, it will be a higher impact on the county.
Right.
But if we get some of the children and youth funding back, we still have to front that money.
Right. And we still haven't, and because this is so conservative, we didn't include aging, community services, 911, the court system, the public defender, the district attorney. We certainly haven't talked about, I mean, I know we don't fund municipalities or the police, but we certainly haven't talked about that. And that certainly the county could play a part in really negatively affecting our municipalities and our police. It's just very worrisome, and I want to have a really good handle on it because I think we're up against a very tough decision. Several of us sat in on the CCAP call. So hopeful for the budget, but not hopeful, right? I mean, you can't sit around being like, oh, I hope it gets there, right?
I think the other concern that I have, and this is real life experience, and I mentioned this earlier in the week, we're receiving phone calls from hospitals out of our region because our homeless shelter has a bed. And they're asking us to help get a person who's not from around here into treatment services here using our resources. To me, this further complicates our problem because if this is a statewide problem with mental health and treatment services as well as housing, you know, wherever we can find a bed is where the person is going to land, which is going to impact the local resource array wherever that person lands. But when I received that call, my questions were, well, does this person have any family here? Does this person have any connections here? And the answer to all those questions was no. But the homeless shelter had a bed. So therefore, we were trying to connect treatment services, which were already struggling to connect people to treatment services. So it further complicated the issue.
And I want to follow up with this question, and I know that this is not within the scope of what we were supposed to talk about today, but I worry about this too, Andy, because I hear we're drowning, right? And I know that we don't have enough employees in many of these with many of these providers. So when this is filled, when this gap is filled, how are we going to deal with, well, we filled the gap. How are we still going to be able to deliver the services?
If we fill the gap and our provider network has a feeling that it's safe, because now what I'm getting is phone calls from consumers, people who are in service to say, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my case manager. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my supported living staff worker. What am I going to do? And I'm getting calls from staff saying, am I going to have a job after July 1? So, you know, there needs to be a sense of safety. Otherwise, people will look for other careers. And it still may create anxiety in the people who are receiving services that could still possibly compensate in higher levels of care. So it's very complicated.
Yeah, it is. Yes. Well, you've been very helpful today. I appreciate the work, Dana, and the work of everyone, and the conservative estimates. Thank you.
One question on the follow-up to that last question is, since we've outlined particularly that there are significant costs that will accrue to municipalities, because it's the municipalities, not the county, that are responsible for providing first responder support, public safety. And I spoke to, I can't remember his name, Megan Johnston's husband, Matthew, who was on your board at the last town hall meeting, and spoke to him about, you know, how can we get
perhaps the Chiefs of Police Association more involved. We've had that discussion, but nothing's happened on that to my knowledge.
Well,
So-
actually, the chiefs of police met today,
Okay,
and Bob Shively told me that that was on the agenda.
yes, he told me he was going to bring it up. Matt said he was going to bring it up with them. So, you know, it would seem to me that having them more heavily engaged, they are our conduit to the municipalities who candidly, and I was a municipal official for 14 years. If the county's going to pay for it, you're not going to step up as a municipality and say, yeah, we're willing to accept that responsibility. We've already seen some of that this year. But it seems to me that those folks are going to have influence with their municipality and more importantly, with the folks who vote on the budget. So I would like to see us really leverage that goodwill that comes from the law enforcement community into helping us with this fight.
Manny, have we heard anything from our hospitals?
From who?
Our hospitals?
They often use HAP as their advocacy network. I think last year CCAP had approached HAP and they were collaborating on
Okay.
the base funded piece.
Okay, thank you.
I guess, anything additional on the MH issue? Not. Thank you folks who were involved in that. We'll move on. We have one other discussion item today, and this is the discussion regarding revisions to the Cumberland County policy. It's been under development for quite some time. Now, I do have one question. So the controller's office is not going to be participating?
Were you able to get in touch with Mike?
I might have fallen down on that job.
Yes, it's been difficult because as you know, we have a temporary individual. And I think the phone has been transferred over.
Okay.
So I know Dana had reached out.
I have talked to him and I asked him to review the policy again
Okay.
and let him know that was,
Okay.
I did not ask him if he wanted to attend the meeting. I told him we were on the meeting.
Okay, but they've not offered, have they offered a formal endorsement of what's being?
I believe, I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but I believe so. I think that we spent, the four of us, spent a tremendous amount of time. And, I think that, we spent a great deal of time both trying to come to consensus and whenever consensus was not an option, trying to understand where each of us were coming from. And then decisions were made at that point. And while there wasn't maybe necessarily like, I 100% agree with that, I understand why it would be worded that way. So that's.
So they found it, my question is, do they find it acceptable? Because they're probably you could characterize them arguably as legally the chief watchdog officer over finances. And a big part of this is, what's the watchdog responsibility? What's the oversight responsibility? So.
I do believe so. I think we met in person on March 17th and spent a great deal of time talking that day. There were a couple of areas where the four of us were not in concert with one another in terms of where we were landing with our, but we continued to dialogue about that. And I think we actually resolved each of I don't want to call them issues. They weren't really issues. They were just areas where we had a different perspective. So I believe so. I would be very surprised if he did not agree with the final product.
Gary, if I can offer some comment on that. At one point, it appeared as though the controller's office was trying to insert themselves into the process. And I did make the statement that I didn't think that was a good idea because you can't be part of a policy that you are auditing to. And they were not even included in the prior policy as having any component, even an audit perspective. So I think that was some of the discussion that was had, Stacy, if I'm not misrepresenting it, that Mike, I believe, agreed that yes, they can't be part and parcel in the policy and audited as well, but they're included and named as their function related to the policy, and that at any point they can audit to that policy.
Okay, I may need more clarification on that. I mean, but what's important here
I
is that you reach
can, I
this.
think I can add to that somewhat. I think that, I think the group started meeting after the February meeting last year. Kelly brought forward some suggestions about the policy. I came late to that group. I think I got involved in maybe June or so of last year. And as we continued to dialogue since then, what we really wanted to make sure was we weren't getting so far down the road with recommendations for a policy that from an audit perspective, the controller would have a problem with. And that was really what Mike was bringing to the table. That was his perspective that he was bringing to us, to make sure that we were looking at having a policy in place that from an audit perspective wouldn't cause alarm.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, we don't have to, not everybody has to love every piece of it.
Of
You know,
course,
the idea is consensus, and facilitation will consensus. Doesn't mean everybody agrees. It means you've come to a solution that everybody can live with. So if you can live with that, whether it's Al or Mike, or whoever that is, then we're good. Okay, please proceed.
Okay, so I don't want to say everything I had on my notes because I think we've already actually said a lot of it, but I do want to just remind you as a recollection that twice last year, individuals brought forward the investment policy, and then there's been a lot of discussion about it. Each time that it's been brought forward, the changes were highlighted and also feedback was sought to make sure that the team was on the right path. And we've already sort of mentioned who the team is, but I'm just going to say it again. We've got Dana from a finance perspective, Mike Clapsettle from the auditing controller perspective, Kelly Niederer from the treasurer's office with banking background, and then myself. I really bring more of an operational, and I think I was probably the individual who was most concerned with wanting to ensure that our policy, in line with the policy review project that we've been getting up and off the ground, that the policy was educational, that you didn't have to be invested in being one of the major parties involved to really read the policy and have a general understanding of what that policy includes. And so that would include everything from, adding additional details, which our subject matter experts were great at providing, and also really formatting the document so that it was structured in such a way that it sort of flows. It flows through from the beginning to the end. So as I mentioned, our goal as a group, especially since July when we were last in front of you, was either to seek consensus or seek agreement that, yeah, there are going to be areas where we don't all agree. And I do believe that the document that we have in front of you, we have both the original document that is currently in place, as well as the most recent updated document does contain maybe not necessarily what everybody would like it to be, but it is acceptable, I think, to the entire review team. I do want to be fully transparent with you. When we were last here, we had several recommendations made by the board, and I believe, incorporated all of them except, Gary, and we've talked about this, but one of the things that you had asked us to consider was the risk assessment. And when we looked at it, it was something that we could certainly do, but it's a point in time. And so what we did instead was to try to really clarify that chart to make sure that it was very clear as to what that chart included, and that we would really have, for most of the items of the security types on that chart, you would have a broker coming in and providing that. So there's going to be a contractual process, and there's going to be a recommendation process that would include a security risk assessment for whatever types of investments that individual or that team wanted to make. The finance department that also does investing, we enumerated in footnote number 3 exactly what those types are. And so I believe that really makes that security risk assessment something that isn't necessary. But I did want to just point out that was really one of the recommendations that was made, and we did address it. We just wanted to go in a different direction to provide the safeguards. I think that was your concern.
It just provides it at the time.
Yeah.
Point in time at which it's.
Yes, yes. So Dana is going to provide for you an overview of the policy changes from a financial perspective. And I am going to turn everything over to her in just a moment, but I do want to make sure, I've already mentioned it, that one of the big changes that we've made this with this policy, and you'll see this with other policies coming forward, that it is more educational. It provides additional details so that anybody reading it should be able to understand really what that policy entails. Also, you'll note that some of the major changes, again, this has been a long process. So some of the major changes include the parties involved. We've really enhanced that section to identify both from the investment perspective as well as from any auditing perspective. Kelly mentioned about, the controller involvement. So they're included as a party involved with that understanding. And then the other thing is, you'll note in the policy that is currently in place, it calls for a Cumberland County Investment Board. That would be a very costly board to meet, considering the players that are included. And it is a second-class county requirement. It is not a third-class county requirement. And really, section 5, paragraph 5, again, the chart, and then what follows that chart, it's A through, I believe, M, really enumerates everything that that board would be reviewing for any major investments. And I think that's a much cleaner way of doing it. It's much more streamlined. There's really no need to bring that group together to only look through the policy and go, yes. So that is another major change you'll see.
So that's gone entirely.
It's gone entirely.
Probably never face that because we're not going to be a second class county.
I mean, don't hold your breath. I mean, it could happen, but it's not going to happen anytime in the near future. You're right. You're right.
But frankly, I thought it had transparency issues.
And there never was. I mean, I don't believe that board was ever called. It would never met.
Yeah.
Not once.
Yeah. Just creates, I think, a bureaucratic outlook that we're really seeking to avoid. And so with that, that's, yeah.
So she talked about most of what I had planned on talking about, so mine will be short and sweet. So one of the major changes that we made, we're recommending to make, is the percentage that we can allow in any one bank. Currently, the percentage is 35%. We're requesting to increase that to 40%. We will still try to keep it at 35%. However, when we have either a large influx of money, a large outflux of money, or we don't have as much money as normal, it's hard to have that money spread at 35%.
I did take special note of that when I did the comparison, and that's, I guess, how's that arrived at? Because can we put a time limit on that or something of that nature? Because it's.
We do it for a month. We actually watch and check it.
Yeah.
And that's where we have the pressure. And usually we have 2 or 3 banks where we earn the most money.
Yeah.
And if we start spreading beyond that,
Right.
we're not maximizing as much. And we do occasionally have money in places that we're not earning as much, but sometimes between the front runner 2 or 3, there's a big difference between the next runners up. So this will just give us the flexibility to not have to worry about it in a temporary situation, because our goal is still going to be 35%. And that's, sorry. And then I think Stacy already covered one of the other pieces, and that was the glossary at the end. We enhanced that substantially just to make sure that we are talking about what the different items are, so people have a mechanism to go and really understand and educate, as opposed to just having the policy. Any additional questions?
I have a question, but I wanted to see if Kelly had anything she wanted to add.
Yeah, I think, well, I can do mine if you have a question, Gina, and I can.
Okay, here's my question on conflicts of interest. It says employees. Does this include elected officials? Because it seems like it should.
Yes, I had that written down too.
My assumption is it would be anybody that's touching it, but you're right,
No, because those two things are convoluted, right? Because some things apply to elected officials as employees and other things don't.
I mean, this policy is, and then that's a great question, because this policy is, and I believe Stacy took effort to make sure that it did include elected officials as representatives. You know, employee may be the wrong word if in that instance, because it is meant to cover elected officials as well.
Yeah, I think it has to cover, I think if we're gonna bifurcate between the two, I think it has to cover both.
It lists everyone that is involved, so there is clarity as to some of those folks that are, you know, not technically employees. They're named, and I think that they would be responsible to adhere to the policy. But I know that when Stacy, you know, that was an area of concern. Some of the elected officials, quite frankly, may not know what this policy is or be
Right.
following it.
Just to build on that. So if we're going to put that in there, and I have no objections to that, then it seems to me you're gonna have to have some type of threshold in what constitutes a material personal investment position. Is it, you know, dollar value? And I think this, you're leaving an enormous loophole here if you don't also mention campaign contributions, because that's been a topic in the past about control the accounts, campaign contributions.
Well, you have to report your campaign contributions anyway, and then what we're doing is mixing
Yeah, I don't.
government and campaigns.
That's financial
Data, that
interest.
seems like that those things are separated on purpose.
We all file a
You-
financial
You
interest
let me
statement.
know.
Yeah, so I've never gotten involved in anything that relates to campaign.
Exactly.
And so I don't have an answer.
I mean, if I receive a campaign contribution, I'm legally obligated to report it in its entirety within the time frame that the law provides. And if I have a relationship with a financial institution and this says that I have to refrain from personal business activity, or I have to reveal these things, then I don't think it matters if it's a penny or it's $3 million. But maybe you gotta clear it up so that no one slides through or tries to snake around it.
The challenging thing with that, Jean, will be our list of approved financial institutions is pretty comprehensive. And so if we're going to get into disclosures as to where we all house personal accounts, I mean, we can do that, but then I think that that needs to be a disclosure. And that would be something that I don't know that Jen Hip had discussed, you know, at what level in her review.
I'd like to know more about it because it really is getting very icky, right?
Yes.
Because we don't have to produce our tax returns. Even on our statement of financial interest, I don't have to tell you where I bank. Right? I don't have to tell you how much money I hold. So, you know, I don't know that I think we need some legal advice on what that
Okay.
means.
Pennsylvania has
that's the
notoriously
conversation.
lax on its financial reporting requirements, especially in the political realm. So we, you know, just because it's lax doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned about it.
So one of the things I did neglect to say is that Jen Hip did review this draft of the policy. And she didn't have any issues with it. However, I've taken some notes and we can certainly follow up with her and have a more involved conversation about conflicts of interest.
But I really feel like this is done, right? This work is finished. I'd like to have that question answered, and then I'm ready to move forward with this.
Yeah,
Are we done?
I'm-
But
yeah.
if we want to table, that's fine, because I have other questions and I can ask those, I can ask them offline, because there's some of them fairly detailed, so. That's okay. If we're not taking action today, I can get those answers.
I did want to make a few comments though, because there was some recent email conversation that was had that was identified that I became involved in this because of a misinterpretation of the county
code, which is absolutely not correct. And I also wanted to back up and say, our advisors that we've worked with on bond, I have not worked with directly, but PFM and Pliget were involved in the creation of this as well.
Have they seen the final document? That was one of my questions. PFM.
They provided the material document that was edited down. We can certainly shoot it back to them. We did not include anything in that would have material changed what they provided to us, but we can shoot it back to them. And I wanted to maintain as well, this policy represents like all of the investment options that the county is permitted to invest in, should you choose to do so. So I had heard that I've made personal recommendations during our discussions that we're pushing for high risk and lower paying investments. And if Dana and Stacy interpreted my involvement that way, I believe that is inaccurate. I have no opinion on the investments that are outlined in this policy. They are merely what is permitted under the county code. And I say, for example, if you don't want mortgage-backed securities in there, I am completely indifferent, and ultimately I do not care, but they are permitted under county code. So I was not making any recommendation during our discussions involved in this. I did indicate that I personally, it's my opinion that we should have everything that you can invest in the policy, should your advisor choose to do that, but that is entirely up to you. And, you know, I also was accused of there being such urgency to this. And in fact, I do believe there is urgency to this because of the current situation. We've had 2 failed banks recently, and the reason those banks have failed have been because there have been runs on deposits that exceed the FDIC maximum. And quite frankly, the vast majority of our deposits exceed the FDIC maximum. And we are required to collateralize those, which you all well know. But I call the current banking environment, I don't say it's crisis, but it is certainly tenuous. And I think that this is something that we do need to not languish on. As we discussed, the current policy discusses an investment board, which quite frankly doesn't exist, but you have delegated your investment authority to Dana. But ultimately, you know, you as the board are responsible for every account that's opened. You sign on it, every investment that's made, every transfer of funds, and you are ultimately saying that these funds are protected from loss. Neither the finance office nor the treasurer's office have control over any accounts. So we do have operational accounts, which are not technically investments, and we defined investments, I believe, under this as being excess cash flow. So that's an important item to note. But you know, we have some deposits that are required to offset fees, and these investments, as Dana mentioned, some of our operating accounts, they earn lower rates of interest. And some are required to offset fees, some are required just to have a relationship with an organization so that we can then do other investments with them, like CDs or that sort of things. Because I think I have shared with you time and time again, some financial institutions do not want government deposits. They just simply don't. But you are also signed on every operational account as you well know. So the major issues, the changes that we haven't really discussed here were that under our existing policy, finance was charged with monitoring the collateral and keeping the deposits safe. That has changed in this policy. That is the responsibility of what the treasurer's office has been doing. And in the current policy, it states that I would bid the investments. That is not what has been happening. The investments, as we've said, have been bid by the finance department. The treasurer's office executes on those. But again, you're signing at every point on everything that we conduct. So it's just some of those. There was one other item in here that I wanted to point out to you. And quite frankly, the current policy indicates that a review of our approved financial institutions will be conducted by the commissioners and the treasurer. And I believe we need to do that now. And so in the new policy, I did suggest that this was a role the controller could take on. Mike did not seem to want to do that. So the current policy assigns that to the treasurer's office, that we will do the vetting and bring it to the commissioners for approval. That will be done according to a resolution. We have been doing resolutions designating the approved in financial institutions, and it has worked out well, quite frankly, for us. But it is more formalized in this policy. So, I mean, the investment policy, quite frankly, I was asked to be involved. I know Stacy is doing a good job of trying to track the policies, and I've made suggestions on 2 other policies that I think could be added to this mix. One is a cash handling policy, and another is an electronic banking policy. Which would address a situation that we recently experienced here, where one of our providers gave me access to 3 accounts that that were opened up under the county tax ID, that quite frankly, I should not have had access to. So we immediately shut that down. I think I sent you a memo on that. So an electronic banking policy would also help to prevent some of those things. I believe those are some of the things that I wanted to point out as it relates to the new policy. Do you have any other questions of me?
I do not. It sounds like this cleans up some things that were not working in the old policy, and there were some things that were absent from this policy that were needed. So I do think it's time to get this done.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. We've got to finish this up.
It is easier to read by far.
Yes.
I think that goes to what you were saying about making it educational. We do need that done, but it also needs to be done right. That's why I was concerned that Jen Hip might not have sufficient time with her other duties, but she got it done, right?
Yes,
And she's
so,
good with that.
yeah, I think there are 2 ways that you could move forward. You could certainly table this until Jen has time to talk about the conflict of interest. You could also, if you wanted to, take it up for approval and just make that approval contingent upon a final review and update of that language for Jen Hip's review. I think those are probably the 2 ways that you can go.
I'm fine with that.
I do have additional questions.
Sure.
And I'm sure, at some point, Controller's Office will, be what's done here today, and that may raise additional questions, but, I agree. The policy looks to be much improved. Any policy should be robust, in particular in terms of safeguards, which is, where my questions have been on this. It should be understandable to future users, because we've had this instance where, players change on the scene, and they need to understand not only what the policy is, but what the intent behind it was. This helps do that. And it needs to be practical. That is, practices ultimately have to match the policy. We haven't had that. The practices are good. The policy was not good. So we should match them up.
And this was last looked at in 2006.
Yes.
Yeah.
Financial crisis. And I think the other thing that you may want to consider, since that old policy, we have added Pliget, which is a different type of a relationship and account. And I've recently, there are other accounts similar to Pliget. There's an invest program for government that is a state-run kind of Pliget program. So there may be other options. I don't believe that it will, the fact that we use these would materially change our policy at all. Because any of the investments that are outlined within that policy would be the same that would be utilized within Pliget or Invest, or there's another one, ISLAP, I believe it is, program.
That raises a question with me because one of the reasons the inadequate policy has languished is because the previous treasurer had significant difficulty accepting Pliget. And I'm not sure what the root of that was, but it was a fair source of contention for him. And what has changed on that, or?
If I understand that correctly, Gary, quite frankly, it was, he preferred to use banks. He just preferred to use banks because of the relationships that had been built over the years.
Okay.
And to get them to respond, because again, we need to have a relationship with operating accounts and not
Right.
every bank wants them.
Right.
So if you go to Pliget, they have now, they do offer operating accounts, but it has, that functionally would be very difficult for us to use the way that we're currently set up to do operating accounts there. They could, however, do it. But I believe it was to try and keep our fees very, very low and retain more deposits in banks than with PIP and Pliget.
Which is interest more about the local end. I'm not aware of any fee problems because when I was with the Council of Governments, they did all their banking through Pliget. And it was always bid out, but.
Yeah, I'm talking about the bank because there's been a push now for banks to get fees. And the county has already historically structured their accounts to not have fees involved with them. So I think that he was trying to maintain those types of relationships. I did have occasion to speak with Pliget because particularly when it related to they have become our largest deposit holding because we have so many excess deposits currently. And I wanted to understand the assets in the portfolio when we saw the collapse of a bank, because quite frankly, what happened were the mismatch between the need for current funds and what it was being backed with under their portfolio, which was long-term, and did a fairly deep dive with them on the average maturity and life of the Pliget portfolio. Should there be anything, and how quickly we would be able to get our money by liquidating what was in the portfolio. But I am recommending that they present to you, to the board, at some point, if you would want to engage. I think it would be really good for an understanding. I am aware that, Gary, you met with some of our banking partners early in the year with some outside legal counsel. So if you have other items that you want the board to review or see, I'm happy to get anyone in here. They would be happy to discuss it with you.
Yeah, I think those questions revolved around the risk questions, which is a legitimate issue. I just wanted to mention too that since last year,
Excuse me, what risk issue?
I'm really sorry. I'm gonna back up on this for a second. I hate to interrupt this, but did you meet with us about our banks with outside legal counsel?
It was not, not with our legal counsel. They had legal counsel present. I met with banks.
Okay, I'm totally confused.
No,
You just said.
No, when I spoke with my contact at the bank, they had met with Gary with his counsel.
Oh, he was not there as counsel. He was there for the Industrial Development Authority.
About county.
He was there for the
accounts?
Industrial Development Authority because of it. So anyhow,
Oh, hang on. I'm not ready to go to anyhow. You just said something that could you please repeat it? And then I'd like Gary to give a yes or no answer or some kind of.
When I was talking about getting banks in here, at one point, I was made aware that Gary met with one of our banking
Yes.
partners.
to discuss the differences between investing in a bank and a federal credit union, which we've not done before.
And you did that as county business?
I did it in my capacity as a county commissioner,
Okay,
which
so
I have
that's a
every
yes.
right to do. I have every
And you
right to do.
took an attorney that's not the county's attorney to that meeting?
He is a personal acquaintance of the gentleman. He set up the meeting with me.
This is so. You went to a meeting with a bank to talk about county deposits in business with an attorney that is not an attorney for the county.
He's the attorney for the Industrial Development Authority.
But you
And
went to,
the
you didn't go to talk about the IDA.
Yes, we did. We talked about
just said
that
you
as well.
talked
We
about-
talked about that
Yeah,
as well.
that was out of line.
No, I'm sorry.
And
you
this
don't-
is why we need to go over the conflict of interest.
It's, you know,
Out of line, out of line, out of
It's
scope of
called, it's
authority.
called oversight, and that's
It's
what
out of
ours
your
is.
scope of
Maybe-
authority.
So
I'm not gonna go
what
there.
I
So
was
I'm
going to
gonna finish.
offer
my-
is that they could come in if you wanted that organization.
You're
to come in.
disgusting. Did you just call me disgusting under your breath? Because sometimes you call me a bitch under your breath.
I do know, I've never said
The
that. I
hell
have
you
never said
haven't.
that.
And
You've
this
always
time
tried
you
to
just
pick a
went,
fight.
you are disgusting. You say shit to me all the time under your breath.
And you don't,
No, I don't. I say
Yes.
it to your face.
so.
I say it to your
You make
face.
childish remarks.
Because
I'm not engaging in this, okay? I'm not engaging. I have one
braver
last point.
than
I'd
you
like to make.
Oh, my God.
I have one last
I'd
point
like to
here,
have the county
because
solicitor look at what happens when a county commissioner shows up in a meeting with the bank, with legal counsel to talk about county business with legal counsel that is not the county's. I'd like to know that. I'd like to have the answer to that.
I don't know where you ever
What
got
does
this
that
idea
mean?
that you get to censor what I say
I
or
just
muzzle
heard
every one
it.
of my
I'm not
activities.
trying
You
to
do
muzzle
not. I'm a
you.
county
You
commissioner.
have
I'm not the county
gone over your bounds.
commissioner.
This is a board of three,
I
not a board of
I don't sit
one.
in every one of your
Cumberland
meetings. I
County
don't
is
sit
not
on
your
every one of your
freedom.
meetings. I do
I
not
don't
sit on
do
every one of
stuff
your
like
meetings.
that.
Yes, you do.
I
Yes, you do.
understand
Here's my
my
last question.
behavior and
My
my
last question.
boundaries.
Apparently not. The last question I have is in terms of when we had this discussion a year ago regarding the federal credit unions, because that's a significant change. And that's what prompted the meeting, was that.
Why would you meet with the bank on federal credit?
I wanted to talk to a bank on what safeguards are in place for a commercial bank versus a federal credit union.
So
I
Gary,
spoke to the federal credit union as well, okay? So through Katie, I have a lot of banking contacts and I do speak to them on county matters. That's the point of having contacts. So here's my question for you. And this is not meant to be, this is not a confrontational question. I simply wanted to know, I asked you before, who are we contacting? You told me and that's fine. I just wanted to pass along to you that through Katie, I was made aware that Belco Federal Credit Union they have now reached that threshold that I think you outlined for us, and they are interested in being
yes.
considered.
I
And-
have their information.
Good.
And so I guess I am.
And New Cumberland Federal
concerned.
Credit Union also.
They're not, they're too
They,
small.
they said they're too small, but they said they are working toward them, be very
Yeah, they are way
interested.
too small and I would have
Okay.
we could not safely put our money in that size of an institution.
All right.
Particularly under county code. When I first arrived here, I think we were in violation
Right.
because of the amount of money we had with a small bank at that
Yes.
time. And it was much larger than that credit union. So under county code, it was modified to permit investments in credit unions. And we have some departments, quite frankly, that are investing in credit unions. And they are subject to the same requirements. They have to collateralize deposits in the same fashion and with the same commitment that we would have in place. I have not advanced even going to a larger relationship with the credit union based upon the email that I sent you, where we had significant difficulties in that relationship based upon, I don't think they are truly ready to take on some of our deposits. So that account was kept at the FDIC, FSLIC, which is their backer of deposits below the threshold. So part of my comment that we need to review our banking partners, particularly now for their strength, given this environment, was also the fact that I met with Belco and they did represent that they're interested. They provided me financial information,
But I'm not making that presentation until I know it's my responsibility to do so. Until, in the current policy, as I said, it states that it is collectively that you and me to do. So, if it is my responsibility, I will in fact do it, and then you all can approve it. But until then, I'm not interested in doing that reporting.
So what are we doing with this today? Are we moving it forward as Stacy suggested?
I guess my question would be, how is this conflict of interest different than any conflict of interest that we have on anything that we execute related to your job, review of contracts, my job? I mean,
I think it's
I'm
an
just-
excellent question, and that's, and the thing that really made me wonder was just the wording. I just think words are important, and maybe the wording needs to be
no,
better.
it is very.
I don't think it's different than any other conflict of interest. But I would hate to see that used, right? For the county to end up in trouble because there was a conflict of interest that wasn't revealed.
I guess the question of that still comes back to the threshold. You know, if you have to have a certain, what is material? What is material? So, I mean, we have every one of the elected officials, I believe, on the retirement board, they all have holdings in these companies too. So that the banks are investing in as underlying securities too. So it just helps to know. So I'm just saying, yes, let's get the clarification from the attorneys.
I wonder if we're having the same thought about that.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess, Gary, you just mentioned, you have relationships. Clearly, I was in banking for 30 years. I have banking relationships. So is it a fact that, I know different people at PNC, even though we have no deposits, if PNC comes, well, I shouldn't say that. There's an account that I'm not technically involved in at all related to our pension that is at PNC. Does that make me have a conflict of interest? Because
Probably not. It's a small community. We all know people, but that's where the
So
lawyers
it's-
can help us understand, what types of parameters are necessary.
so I guess my level of conflict of interest is if you benefit in some fashion, the fact that the county banks with PNC or M&T or whatever, if I have stock in either one of those, it's of no significant benefit.
Right.
In fact, I would construe to me personally, because the county banks in, now if I were somehow on a board of a bank, then I would say, yes, that's the level where I would have to recuse myself from involvement. But I think it is perhaps reaching on some level, and with the defined parameters and the fact that I can't control any deposit, Dana can't control any, she bids, we execute. I feel like the room or the potential for conflict is already pretty limited. So
Let's ask the lawyers.
And I just would note, it is the same exact wording as the current policy. So it was probably something we were so focused on everything else
Yeah.
that we didn't really give this a read for educational purposes. So yeah, I think Jen will be more than happy to sit down and review and provide some guidelines to make that, just tighten the language.
No, I think it's a very good effort. It's all we ever do. So,
The part you're looking at is on page 3, section 4, item 2, conflict of interest.
Yes, yes.
it is standard, it seems pretty boilerplate.
And actually, I think I take some of that back. It looks like the second paragraph, which is on the top of page 4, that might have been added. Yeah, I think that was added to really make it a more robust statement. But again, I think
But
it could be more
encompasses
educational.
the conflict of interest of the investment advisor.
Yeah, yes,
So
yes.
it did not previously include a conflict statement for any investment advisor that would be utilized.
Yeah.
And the new policy does.
Thank you. Very informative.
So do you need a motion on this?
I think that really is up to the board, whether you want to approve it contingent upon final
Well,
review.
I'm not
or-
prepared to vote in favor of it today. If there's a vote, I'll vote no.
Well, the agenda says discussion and approval, so do we have to move on this at all? Or do we have to table it? What do we do?
I think if you want us to return next week with an updated language, then it would need to be tabled. And then we would be able to talk with Jen and bring it back to you next week.
Carrie, are you gonna get all of your questions answered by next week?
Yeah. Yeah, there's not a huge number. None of them should be enormously difficult, so.
So then I'm gonna move to table the potential approval of the Cumberland County investment policy until the next finance meeting.
Second. Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion. For next week. On that, thank you for the answers today. Okay, that moves us into item number 5, which is other business. Anything additional? Commissioners, staff, no. If not, entertain a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Stand adjourned.